Stop killing games. Why does this matter? Currently, the gaming industry is going more and more towards the trend of live services, making most games into an online-only dystopia where even single-player contents are locked behind online connectivity. This, in return, has caused a ton of games, both paid or free-to-play with monetized goods, to later be completely inaccessible. Somehow, gaming has become even worse than outright gambling and casinos, with all of the money invested into games just disappearing into thin air. Live service games once promised a future of endless updates, community-driven events, and living worlds. In the racing genre, this translated to evolving car rosters, time-limited tournaments, and personalized progression system. But what happens when these promises are broken? In fact, just in the last 5 years alone, we've seen a ton of games that would die without anything remaining to let people who purchase these games any form of access either online or throughout local LAN play. We've even seen games die in less than a month or year being a more common happening. Now, some of them did refund their player bases, but how about those that don't?
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Now, there are exceptions to the rules. Games that would continue to live on thanks to its community effort and thankfully the IP owner either letting the community do whatever they want with now the defunct title, or by actually just designing their games to remain playable after the servers go down. One of the most important examples would be, of course, with the 2010 live service version of Need for Speed, based on the Black Box games, with its map and somewhat similar physics. The idea was that players could roam the open world map, based on Most Wanted's Rockport and Carbon's Palmet City, where they could drive and run into actual players or friends and participate in pretty much anything you can think of, whether it be your average car show, races, or pursuits. It was a neat idea, but World was unnecessarily grindy and heavily favored those who bought their way to the top. Rewards from races like cash or new parts came frequently, but buying new cars or expanding your garage was exorbitantly expensive. Initially, you couldn't even go past level 10 without buying a starter pack, effectively paywalling the experience for those that would have purchased the game after the so-called early level demo. It's no surprise that most players got bored and moved on. They would eventually release the cap and make the game completely free to play, but the game was still riddled by microtransactions for both performance parts and even visual customization. But everyone else that had purchased the starter pack had effectively purchased the game in a sense. But this game had a lot of things you could find enjoyable in. The fact that you could race online seamlessly with other random players or friends, even experiencing what it feels like to be in heavy pursuit with your friends and all the chaos associated. That's a very rare experience to have even in the future Need for Speed titles, and it was all thanks to the mix of every design element present in this title. Alas, the game would eventually be shut down in 2015, 5 years after the game was launched, leaving people with nothing left to re-experience the contents of the game. Since then, multiple personalized servers for NFS World have spawned, each bringing in their own type of balancing and even adding in new content to what is effectively a dead game, mostly thanks to the efforts of the community. And so today you can easily play NFS World for free by looking up any of these fan servers. EA doesn't seem to have any issues with fan-made work, despite their low reputation, so it's not surprising to see them not really go after these projects. It's a similar tale for Test Drive Unlimited 1 and 2, both MMO racing games that would come out and sort of revolutionize the racing game landscape by being the pioneer of having a massively open map, almost mimicking the actual locations in terms of size. The first game being a 2006 title was impressive. It was an amazing first experience, chock full of charm for being an early adopter MMO racing game, even if a lot of its mechanics are quite archaic nowadays. TD1 effectively had almost everything an MMO would provide: a housing system, customization shops for both the player avatar and tuning for the vehicles, with the addition of dealerships and events being spread out far and wide to encourage world exploration, which if you're playing online at the time, means running into another player and potentially kicking off some form of multiplayer actions, or simply make the game feel more lively. TDU2 would follow in the footsteps of its predecessor, but that game also comes in with the addition of a dedicated single-player campaign, full with its own progression system, storyline, cutscenes, voice dialogues, specialized rivals, proper driving school and license system. The game effectively has way more single-player experience than its predecessor, yet it kept most of the multiplayer features while still adding on top of it. Things like the houses now have an explorable interior that can be shared with other players online, and way more activity activities in the overworld for players to share together, be it for the races or even the newly added pursuit modes. But you know what both of these games did that made them stand out? Besides the whole bit about revolutionizing open world MMO racing games, these games were designed to be playable offline. You can still play TDO 1 and 2 completely as a single player experience, and besides the multiplayer parts, you can basically experience the whole content all on your own. The entire map, the dealerships, cars, houses, and progress all remains available even after the game's multiplayer support was taken down. Even then, this is yet another game that has received community support in that aspect. If you look online, you'll find communities and ways to play both TDO 1 and 2 online once again, giving a chance to those that didn't get to play these games at its peak to experience at least a fraction of what TDU was like back then. The design decision to make a multiplayer focused game remain playable as a single player would trickle down to the future of some racing franchises. For example, Forza Horizon. No matter what your experience with the franchise is, it is undeniable these games still respect ownership in some way, shape, or form. The modern open world racer with its festival vibes, vibrant environment, challenging racetracks, and hundreds of cars. Despite being mostly developed for multiplayer, they are designed to be playable offline. It's a given for the first game, considering it did have a dedicated single-player campaign with its own story, rivals, and progression. But Forza Horizon 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all significantly reduced its single-player campaign in order to sort of mix it up with the online parts, making things like earning new cars to be reliant on the constantly updated seasons. Yet you can still play the game that you own regardless if you have an internet connection. Every single car, every single housing, race event, and even the light story campaigns are all completely accessible in offline mode. They basically took the design of Test Drive Unlimited and simply ran with it. Of course, you can't access things like the multiplayer races or community-made content like the custom-made races, liveries, and shared tuning setups, but that's a given. These are the benefits of when the developers actually designed their game to be future-proof, effectively respecting their player base and customers' time and money at the most basic level, without having to resort to bad tactics of shutting down access in order to funnel any remaining player to whatever their latest projects are. Such is the case with TDU's Solar Crown, the long-awaited follow-up to the Test Drive Unlimited series, now under the brand of Nacon, while having some of their old staff from Eden Games handling the project. However, the game was plagued with issues, things that are promised in the upcoming updates to rectify, except there was one thing very openly missing from the game or any future plans. People clamored for the chance for the game to remain playable without any online requirement, especially thanks to the launch day horrors of the infinite loading screen plaguing the game, and in Season 3 they would finally add the long-awaited solo mode, except it's yet another false promise as the so-called solo mode only bypasses the matchmaking in every event to instantly start races with AI opponents instead. The developers KT Racing simply stated that the always online requirement was done in order to maintain the interconnected world where players can seamlessly interact, except this would also be proven false considering TD1, 2, and every single Forza Horizon in existence destroying any basis of this argument. Considering the game has been massively bleeding in player base, somehow getting destroyed even by the likes of lower budget indies and AA games, the lack of any offline functionality is going to be the death of this game, and when it happens, it's going to take quite the effort for whoever wants to pick up the pieces. This comes in light of recent development within Ubisoft's own Crew franchise.
Today we want to acknowledge that some of you voiced concern about the access to The Crew games. Today, we want to express our commitment to the future of The Crew 2 and The Crew Motorfest. We are currently exploring different solutions and can confirm an offline mode to ensure long-term access to both titles.
With a somewhat sudden announcement of an upcoming update to make the Crew 2 and Motorfest be available offline sometime in the future. Unfortunately, this development would come way after the demise of the first iteration of the Crew, which had its servers and access to the game completely removed from people's libraries. It was a massive shame for everyone. This game was really fun and relaxing to drive in. Imagine having a rough day, let's say in school or work, and you wanted to play something to ease your mind a bit. That's how this game felt to me. Just going for a relaxing drive, not paying much attention to the map, and just seeing where the road takes you. You had the entire US to explore, while albeit a smaller version, but it still felt amazing to drive in and interesting to look at as someone who has never really visited the US, especially going from one end of the map to the other with some good music in the background. The game itself has its own dedicated story mode or single-player content, which ranges significantly from its sequels with a somewhat darker tone and being a bit more serious. Yet the fact that people can't even access this game's single-player content anymore is simply unacceptable. A while back, I made a video covering The Crew and what it had to offer. I had an amazing time revisiting the game and the somewhat over-dramatic story, only I never really considered the game was already close to being shut down. Thankfully, there is a server that is actively working on making the game playable again, which I will link down in the description. But I think what's more surprising is how this game has become the catalyst for Stop Killing Games, to fight against publishers and the constant killing of video games, and the big talk about game preservation. In case anyone may bring up Polyphony with GT Sport and how they patched the game allowing the game to finally be playable offline, the unfortunate reality is that that situation is an exception and not the norm. Most publishers will choose to just outright shut down a live service title over spending a little bit of resources just to make them still be accessible in the future. Sometimes the community may be capable of picking up what was left behind to substitute that missing experience, but most of the time that requires a ton of effort and the possibility of a legal battleground if the IP owner decides to effectively add an extra middle finger to its own community. Now, like anyone out there, I believe that if you purchase and own a certain game, you should be able to play it many years down the line. And what Ubisoft and many other publishers wants us to get used to is the fuck you, we can do whatever we want treatment, and take down games whenever they please and there isn't anything we can do about it. But thankfully, there is something you can do. For those of you somehow still unaware, Stop Killing Games is trying to stop the continuous cycle of killing games. Now, the movement can't really make any major moves in the US due to things being hard locked in that region, and the UK are just pretty hopeless, but the EU petition is still up at least until the end of this month. As of currently, there's already 1.3 million signatures on the petition, but based on the latest update by Ross of Accursed Farms, it's likely that a percentage of the signatures are bogus or invalid. So if you are an EU citizen, it is still worth signing if you haven't, even if it's just the EU for now. If this passes, then just like with the USB-C connector, that enforcement will slowly trickle down to the rest of the world. So I'm making this video to spread awareness about this, so if you do have a bit of spare time, please check out the petition and help it out. Just think of how many more games like TDU1, 2, or imagine if there would be more Need for Speed Worlds that could be saved but more convenient if this actually passes. A lot of live service games have died by this point, and many more will die if we do nothing to stop it. Or the bigger one being Anthem, the quite unsuccessful disaster trying to squeeze in the looter shooter genre against the likes of Warframe and Destiny. That game may have been a disaster, but there are people who still love the game to this day, and those people deserve to at least still be able to access the game at least in a solo offline mode. The Crew's shutdown and the publicity from it gave us a shot to pull this off, and honestly, I don't know when the next one might happen. It could be years or even decades before we truly get another shot at pulling this off. Ever since the petition reached its original target of 1 million signatures, Video Games Europe, a lobby filled by several major publishers, has since responded to the movement, and their response can be summarized with this.
Fucking thing sucks!
Effectively thinking that somehow developers and publishers are forced to endlessly support the game, which has been openly and outright stated as not being part of the demand, before making more excuses like, oh, but we can't protect you from bad actors if we just hand the key to the community, or claiming that community-run games would be a direct competition to their own currently running games, basically admitting they're afraid of their own player base, preferring the older game over sequels. This ties in directly with planned obsolescence, one of the anti-consumer practices running rampant currently, or somehow saying that these community-run games could lead to reputational damage to the developers.
See, this actually makes me just want to throw somebody off my balcony. I mean, I've never wanted to throw someone off my balcony as much as I do reading that.
Even though they are no longer supporting it, and most people would have been made aware of that fact when downloading community-run servers. Like, did people actually think EA is somehow still directly involved with how every private NFS World server is run, or Eden Games are still involved with Project Paradise and etc.? It's just more bogus argument after effectively trying to shit down the throats of their own consumers. This ultimately comes down to making sure we can preserve these pieces of media. Regardless of what you think about these individual games, you cannot deny that there will always be something that sticks out as a meaningful piece of art. The visuals, music, and writing involved in the making of these video games should be considered as such. So let's contribute to what is effectively a preservation of video games.